Hello friends, this is Growl. I'm here joined by my good friend Dorki.
Yo, what up? It's your boy,
And we
Dorki.
are doing the official Dragonflight Mythic Plus Day 1 tank tier list. Now, I know everyone wants to know, from a healer perspective, which tank feels good to heal, but I still have my good friend Dorki. You know, he's been playing some tanks on beta, and we're going to walk through each of the tank, where he ranks them, where he sees them as part of the meta, and I'll maybe ask some questions along the way to get some information out of them.
Yeah, I haven't been playing that much beta. I've only been playing like 12 to 16 hours. I try to play more, but
it's been kind of
get
disappointing trying to
healers
catch your
down.
streams. You only stream for 16 hours a day. All right, so the tank that everyone wants to know from Dorki himself, we're starting off hot. Where are you putting Bear?
So I'll just start off by saying I don't think any tank in particular is outstanding. They're all pretty close. Bear tank is pretty good. I'll put it in A. Initially, I would have had it at S, but I do feel like there are some things holding it back from being that S tier tank. This doesn't mean that it's not going to be played at some of the highest keys. In fact, I might be playing some Bear tank myself in the beginning of this season. The main thing with Bear tank is it gives Mark of the Wild. That's extremely good. They have crazy off healing with After the Wildfire and hard healing. You can actually hard heal. I was thinking about doing hard healing in some of these dungeons where my healer might be lacking on the heals, especially if I somehow have a Mistweaver in my group.
What?
So I might need a little bit more group healing.
Whoa.
But they do a lot of damage. They actually do some of the highest damage right now. And they are pretty simple to play. It's a little bit more complicated than before. Not like super complicated, but it does have a little bit more complexity. Incarn's also on a really short cooldown now. Incarn can be as short as 1 minute to 2 minutes, depending on how big you pull, which is actually kind of insane. It means if you're doing any large pulls, Bear Tank will always excel. I feel like in some dungeons in particular, Bear Tank might actually be the best tank, like Algafar's Academy. But ultimately, I feel like it depends on the comp you're playing. If you don't have a Druid in your group, you probably want a Bear Tank.
Wait, so what happened? I thought Bear tank just sucked. It was bad, and then it was bad for all the beta, but now it's A tier?
Yeah, it was very bad, and they gave massive buffs to Bear Tank. Like, biggest buffs we've ever seen. It got 50% damage increase across the board, except for Moonfire. And it has this one talent that gives you 5% DR per point. It's 2-point talent. Think about how crazy that is for a second. 2 points and you get 10% DR. And after the Wildfire, it also got buffed massively.
It sounds like a tank that's good for pugs, right?
I would say so, yeah. More so, it's good for beginner players. I wouldn't say like pugs necessarily, but it's great for players who aren't very comfortable with the tanking role. It's very easy to pick up. It's pretty forgiving to play. I think it's a great tank for anyone looking to get into tanking.
Nice. Well, I think all the bears will be happy about that one. Another tank that is another big fan favorite, Blood DK. Where are you putting Blood DK? I'm sure you've been playing this one a lot.
Yeah, so Blood Decay, I'm also going to put in the A tier, as with many other tank specs. You'll see later on. Blood Decay, as a tank, it's actually really high up there. Like, individually, if you only care about yourself, you don't care about anyone else, you just want to be able to tank things, it's like an S tier tank. But it does have some issues. Its damage is a little bit lower than other tanks, and it's not as reliable of a tank. I think tanks being reliable is extremely important. Nobody wants to play with a tank that can randomly get one shot sometimes. Also, Blood Decays don't really offer anything to their team. They don't have any group buffs, and their utility, even though it's a lot better, is not quite on par with some of these other tanks. I do think Blood Decay is amazing though. If you really want that tank that is self-sufficient, you just want to be able to live forever, even if your healer dies, even if nobody's kicking, like you just have cast going off on you constantly, Blood Decay is probably the best tank for that, by far, and it's not even close. This tank might even be really good in some situations because it's the only tank that can survive some dungeons. Like Temple of Jade Serpent, currently on beta, that dungeon is overtuned for a lot of tanks. And I've been playing Blood Decay in some of the highest temples on beta, just because it's the only tank that can survive.
How does the playstyle change from the end of Shadowlands? Because we saw Shadowlands being like the 4-piece tier set, infinite Crimson Rune weapon. Is that still a thing? Or how does Blood Decay live nowadays?
So nowadays, Blood Decay, they have massive absorb shields because of 2 talents. We have Gloom Ward and Iron Heart. These 2 talents, they make you take no damage at all. Well, make you take seemingly no damage. But there will be times where you will spike really hard when you just get hit by multiple mobs at a time, and you don't have that 70 to 80% parry that you had permanently in Season 3 and 4. So that's something that Blood Decay has going for it. It's unkillable, yet at the same time, it can randomly get killed.
That sounds like Blood DK, at least from my experience as a healer's POV looking at their health bars. Alright, so next tank. This is a tank that always confuses me because it seems like it's doing insane damage, but it also seems like it dies instantly. It seems like it's gotten a lot harder. Where are you putting Brewmaster on this tier list?
Brewmaster's a tough one because they did recently get buffed, but also damaged and nerfed. I'll probably put in the A tier too because I think it's just as capable as these other tanks, especially after the change. Previously, I probably would have put in B tier, but I do feel like Brewmaster is super capable now. Its utility is a lot more lacking compared to before. The utility they bring as a monk isn't as big as all the new things all these other tanks got. But I do feel like if you can play Brewmaster really well, it's perfectly capable of doing the exact same key levels as the rest of these A tier tanks. It's definitely a lot more effort. If there's any reason you would bring monk, it's damage. Damage is insane on Brewmaster. Like, you'll be able to carry damage harder than any other tank. You're basically a 4th DPS in the group.
Does Brewmaster need a lot of healing? Is there certain healers that you want to pair with it that make a good combo with Brewmaster?
Yeah, so that's been the biggest weakness of Brewmaster. They require a lot of healing, and I don't know how much that changes with the recent changes, or with the recent buffs to Brewmaster. They're super capable of self-healing once you get going, but you need to get started. You need to be sitting in Red Stagger. You gotta be constantly spawning orbs. You gotta have good value out of your Purifying Brew. I think this tank has a lot of potential. I wouldn't be surprised if some Brewmaster player just ends up showing up in the leaderboards. But for now, I do think that's definitely the biggest weak side of Brewmaster.
Alright, well, you put 3 tanks in the A tier. We gotta find a tank that goes somewhere else. This tank was so not good for all of Shadowlands, so this is definitely gonna be a bad tank. Prot Warrior. Where would you be putting Prot Warrior for Dragonflight Season 1?
So, Prot Warrior has gotten the biggest upgrades. Like, every single talent on Prot Warrior is insane. I'm gonna have to put in the A tier. I'm just kidding. This is the S tier tank. I will put this in the S tier. So, I don't actually feel like Prot Warrior is that insane. I do feel like Prot Warrior is a little bit overhyped. However, Prot Warrior does do a lot of damage and it's unkillable. You can put it in the hands of someone who's completely new to tanking and they will notice that they take no damage at all. It's super forgiving to play. I think that's the biggest reason why I would put Prot Warrior that high up there. However, I also don't feel like Prot Warriors do anything in particular that's making them shine over the other tanks in higher keys. Like, I wouldn't be surprised in the highest keys if not a lot of people even play Prot Warrior. Because, like, it's really only just good for surviving, and it doesn't give the best damage, it doesn't give crazy utility that you must have. But Battle Shout is very big, it's very nice if you have a lot of classes that can benefit from the physical damage. And like I said, they're unkillable. They're going to be a very popular choice for the noobs out there. Anyone who wants to just get into tanking, Prot Warrior is extremely forgiving.
Wait, so how is Prot Warrior unkillable if you don't do any self-healing? You don't have any self-healing, right?
Yeah, it's actually kind of crazy because right now you just take no damage, but they did increase the self-healing on Prot Warrior by a lot. We do have Impending Victory now, so that's a nice little health stone we can pop every 25 seconds, or even shorter. We do have way more leech. They've got one-handed specialization and leeching strikes that gives them 10% total leech. It's actually ridiculous. Their tier set is basically leech too. And Indomitable, you can just spam your rage in AoE because of Bloodborne. You just have infinite rage. And you just have infinite ignore pain. So you've got like infinite everything. You got really high leech, infinite block, infinite ignore pain. Super easy to play. It's even good at magic damage now, which is the crazy part. Historically, Prot Warriors struggled really hard with magic damage and bleed damage. But nowadays, you've got Spell Block. Wall is on as short of a 40 to 50 second cooldown. It's actually insane. The problem is, if it's really high constant damage, like Temple of Jade Serpent, as I've mentioned, I don't even know if a warrior can survive a really high Temple of Jade Serpent. Like, say you're doing a world first Temple of Jade Serpent Tyrannical Key, and you're facing Liu, or you're facing Strife and Peril, you'd have to be getting spam healed. You have, like, not a lot of ways of dealing with that. So, like, even though I've said this class is unkillable, there are situations where it kind of gets owned.
It sounds like a lot of the tanks are close together, and it has to do with the type of the fight, right? Like, if there's a lot of mobs, if there's mobs that hit hard physical or magic or whatever, it seems like a lot of the tanks are capable in general, of doing. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's cool. All right, so the next tank, this one is a hard one because it recently got a change and we're not able to see exactly how this played out, but Protection Paladin, I feel like this is a pug favorite. I feel like I see more prot paladins and pugs than any other tank.
This one's definitely a heavily underrated one. I talked with prot paladin expert Drogo, who plays with some streamer healer. They usually fail a lot of keys, but, you know, he is a prot paladin expert. I've also talked with Yodad H. This tank does seem like it's very capable of doing really well. I mean, these guys have it as their #1 tank. It's not even warrior. This is like straight up prop paladin #1 tank. But I do feel like it just belongs in A. It's another A tier tank that is capable of doing everything really well. It's insanely tanky. It's got infinite defensives. It's got the most defensives of any tank, and they're all on really short cooldown. Sentinel is absurd. Sentinel is this new talent they can talent into to make their wings give 30% DR and 30% increased max HP. And wings last for like up to 30 seconds. It's also on like a 1 minute cooldown for the most part. So it's actually insane. Aside from that, they have Eye of Tyr that's on a 1 minute cooldown. They've got Armed Defender that's on a 1 minute or less cooldown. They've got Guardian of Ancient Kings that's on a 2 minute cooldown. Bubble's on basically a 2 minute cooldown. And it's not just Bubble, it's Bubble Taunt too. The biggest thing with Paladin by far is they have infinite interrupts. This class can carry pugs really hard. The problem with infinite interrupts is that it doesn't really have a whole lot of value in organized groups. In organized groups, people already have down all the interrupts. They don't really worry about having the extra interrupts. That's why I don't feel like the strengths of Prop Pally are necessarily there. They have insane support for the group too. The different blessings, Blessing of Sacrifice, Blessing of Freedom even in some situations. And they can now get Blessing of Spell Warding pretty easily. With Blessing of Protection, by the way, you can have both. So in a dungeon like Halls of Valor, you've got Blessing of Protection for the bleeds on Fenrir, but you also have Blessing of Spell Warding for Persia. And group damage actually matters a lot in Dragonflight, so having that support is a really big deal. But yeah, again, the problem with Prop Paladin is they don't provide anything special. They're not the highest in damage, they're not as unkillable as Warrior, except in some situations. And they also don't provide any good damage buff. They give you Diva Aura, which is not as big of a deal.
How do you feel about having to stand in your Consecrate? Is there going to be a kiting meta in Dragonflight where you have to run out of it? I know that's really bad for Paladin.
So kite meta is actually a myth. That's something that's been propagated by the chatters way back in Season 1 of Shadowlands. Kite meta basically referred to Demon Hunter being meta because Demon Hunters have to kite. That's the design of the class. However, with that said, Prop Paladin Consecrate is miserable to play with, and it is still very important, but it is what it is. If you want to play Prop Paladin, you have to be in your Consecrate.
Well, alright, speaking of kite meta, the last tank that we have to rank, so far you said that all the tanks were kind of like close together. With the very last one, we have Vengeance Demon Hunter. Where are you putting our kite meta friend?
This is the last tank I'll put in S tier. I feel like this is probably the highest chance of being one of the top tanks, one of the most popular tanks in high keys. It's got the best utility of any tank. 10-second silence sigil is absurd. It's so good. It's on such a short cooldown too. 42 seconds, you can even make it shorter if you have other talents. It does crazy good damage. I think it's like right up there with Brewmaster after the Brewmaster nerfs. And Chaos Brand has always been extremely valuable, so there's still that. They're pretty tanky. I would say they can, for the most part, tank similar situations to most of these other tanks, like Prop Paladin and Prop Warrior. However, they do still fall over if you run out of stuff. Like, you're still going to have to, quote-unquote, kite when you're doing really high keys and you're doing really big pulls. But for your average key enjoyer, there's no kite meta involved with Demon Hunter. Now that you're playing Demon Hunter, you don't have to kite. You can perform just well, just fine.
Do you feel like tanks now can carry more in their group because they don't have to worry about necrotic, and you have things like Paladins like infinite kicks and Bears off healing and Vengeances like 10-second silence? Do you feel like you have more control over the way how the key goes?
So tanks always had that role of being able to carry. It's the role where you have the most responsibilities, which is, both good and a bad thing. Because if you're doing something bad, then you'll be negatively impacting the group and you will take a lot of the flack. However, you do control what pulls are being done. You do have control over what mobs you are capable of doing. And when you're playing a class like Vengeance or Prop Paladin, as you've mentioned, you have way more control on the CCs, the interrupts. You can lock down these mobs very easily, which makes them very favorable for pugs. Like, even though I put Prop Paladin in A tier, if this was like a pug tier list, I would put it as high as S tier. Prop Paladin is insane for those type of situations.
Yeah, it feels like with the talent trees and having all of your stuff on day one of the patch, it feels like it's going to be a much better expansion for tanks, not having to wait for to get their borrowed power or something 6 weeks into the tier. It feels like overall tanks just feel better and are more sturdy and can do more things like right off the gate.
Yeah, that is something I want to mention. This is the first time tanks have been this powerful in the beginning of an expansion. Normally, we have to wait until the last few patches where we have Corruption or Azerite or all the things in Legion. Shadowlands, we had tier sets. We were reliant on all these built-up powers for tanks to feel good. But this is actually the first time tanks have been really powerful without having to rely on all this external power. Tanks actually can hold threat now, for the most part, unless you're playing with a Havoc Demon Hunter bursting for 300k. And tanks are also extremely tanky. They don't have to be kiting constantly. Tanks also are much more self-reliant. They don't require healers spamming into them the entire time. Now is actually a really good time to be playing tank if you guys are interested in playing tank.
Glad to hear it. Well, all right, that wraps up the Dragonflight Day 1 Mythic Plus tier list. I do want to add again that this is a summation of everything that we learned from playing the beta, but if you're watching this video after the fact, and you want to see an updated list, maybe there was some balance changes or stuff went on in the meta, definitely check out the Wowhead article that's written and maintained by Dorki. He will keep you guys updated on any sort of changes. And with that, I think we will bid you all farewell. Dorki, any parting words you want to give to the fans?
Actually, I do have something to say. For tanks, they're a lot closer than I can really put it out to be. I mean, I already have them all in 8, right? If I really wanted to separate them, I could maybe separate them a little bit, but it's so hard. These tanks are so close right now. Just play whatever the hell tank you want. I swear, as long as you're doing well, you'll perform just fine. The only reason I even put Pro Warrior in S tier is because it's easy as hell to play. For you noobs out there who can't even play tanks properly. I'm just kidding, that's kind of rude. But if you are looking for a tank that's easy to play, there's Pro Warrior for that. However, I don't necessarily think Pro Warrior is the best.
Right on. Well, it sounds like a great starting of the expansion for tanks. And thanks for watching, everyone. Good luck in your tanking adventures, and have a good one.